What happens when a wheelchair ramp becomes the battleground for a fight against entitlement and discrimination in my seemingly idyllic neighborhood? Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. It was one of those bright Saturday mornings where the sun decided to play peekaboo, and I was more than ready to take it on. With my wheelchair gliding smoothly over the polished hardwood, I rolled into the living room armed with a caffeinated resolve. My unsuspecting morning bliss was swiftly shattered when I spotted the latest missive from the HOA nestled among the bills, apologetic letters from my dentist, and that one jazz magazine I ordered for the articles. Yeah, sure. There it was, a gold-lettered notice commanding my attention like an irate game show host ready to spin the wheel of absurdity. Naturally, it was from none other than the neighborhood's self-appointed queen of grievances, Karen Jennings, the women's club chair and avid knitmaster extraordinaire who had taken it upon herself to blanket my life in chaos over my innocent wheelchair ramp. To her, it was ghastly, a monumental eyesore that threatened the very fabric of our suburban utopia. But for me, it was freedom on wheels. Come on, Karen. Have you ever heard of accessibility? Yes. It even bothered to show up in your fancy pants homeowner's manual. In true theatrical fashion, I could practically hear Karen's piercing voice echoing in my head as I read through the letter, dissecting each complaint with the surgical precision of a disgruntled surgeon. "Imagine the horror, Emily," she would exclaim. "Your ramp is ruining the aesthetic appeal of our community. Don't you care about property values?" "Oh, Karen, darling, I care deeply about something. And it certainly wasn't your feigned concern for our cul-de-sac's image. Who knew that transforming my front porch into a symbol of independence could wreak such havoc on Karen's delicate psyche? You'd think she was advocating for the ancient ruins, not a single ramp supporting a mom trying to navigate life like the rest of us." I rolled my eyes so hard I almost cricked my neck. The fading notion of the neighborly bliss I once envisioned was rapidly replaced by the giddy thought of having my own personal battle box office, directed by none other than Tune In to the Life of Karen, a study in delusional aesthetics. Having both an aversion to mutiny and sheer determination coursing through my veins, I decided enough was enough. But first, I needed Mike, a steadfast ally who could turn my mounting outrage into something that wouldn't make me look like a rabid raccoon on the receiving end of a power wash. Mike, with his affable charm and casual demeanor, was always the neighbor ready to lend a hand. And I figured, what better way to re-strategize than over some breakfast burritos? As I rolled over to his place, I couldn't help but imagine the actual squawking of a neighborhood bylaw meeting led by Karen while delaying my entrance, petty and front-row worthy drama at its finest. I burst through Mike's door, unceremoniously dropping the HOA letter onto his kitchen table and declaring, "You won't believe what Karen's up to now." His eyebrows raised as he took a bite of his burrito, a slight smirk creeping across his face which told me he already had a good idea. Sure, we said we'd meet for brunch, but now it felt more like a strategizing conference with a side of guacamole. "So she's gone after your ramp again, huh?" Mike asked, leaning forward as if the topic required serious focus like that of a physics lecture. "What have you named it this time? The Path of Defiance? Because frankly, I'd back that up with a marketing campaign," he said, cracking a grin. I couldn't help but laugh, because in Mike's world of graphic design, nothing was off limits, and he often turned mundane moments into masterpieces. We spent the next hour brainstorming ridiculous slogans and hashtags. Ramp of Resistance, Wheel Power to the People, and my personal favorite, Screw You, Karen, elicited gales of laughter from both of us, while also scratching the itch of unease that Karen had inflicted on me. But as much as I loved levity, the reality was that we had to take real action. It was time for me to call in the disability board, my ultimate ace in the hole against this entitled community dragon. Sitting there, burrito wrappers piled high, the shadows of injustice loomed heavily upon me. "Mike, if there's any lesson from this entire debacle, it's clearly that some folks need a wake-up call as they proudly clutch their one-size-fits-all rules," I said with mock seriousness. He nodded, unfazed by the weight of entitlement layered between the soy sauce remnants, as he looked straight into my eyes. "Let's get you working on that appeal letter. Maybe we can even add some colorful illustrations to show what the world would look like without a wheelchair ramp." My mind raced with ideas, perfectly envisioning cartoonish depictions of Karen losing her marbles in a world full of rogue ramps making things accessible and lively. It was the whimsical art project I never knew I needed. But then again, that might just contribute to Karen's aesthetic meltdown. And who wouldn't want to see that? After drafting the strongest and most audacious letter imaginable, complete with stats on accessibility and a side note about how Karen might benefit from a dollop of yoga in her life, I was ready to take the plunge. It felt like we were on the precipice of turning the tide in this community standoff, trading in whispers of small-mindedness for a bold declaration of rights. Armed with determination and a fresh stash of snacks to hand out as I presented my case, I marched onward. My immediate neighbor had just built a hedge that loomed over my driveway like an outdated 80s sitcom invasion. But at least it wasn't a ramp made of removable glorified matchsticks. The battle lines were drawn, and I could practically hear the triumphant soundtrack playing as I wheeled out my front door, ready to face the absurdity head-on. What could go wrong? The next day was glorious, in its own way. I rolled to the mailbox as if preparing for an expedition, pondering whether I might find a secret treasure, like Karen's resignation, or better yet, a missed opportunity for a lawsuit against the HOA's narrow-minded enforcement of rules. Instead, I was greeted with the usual combination of flyers for home spa treatments and a thick envelope that could only mean one thing. It was time for the HOA meeting, which felt a lot like being summoned to the principal's office, but with even higher stakes. Kerchunk! The sound of the mailbox closing behind me felt like the official shutting of the door on my spirited enjoyment of life, free from drama. As I sped back home, I felt that mix of excitement and dread like the buildup before a roller coaster plunge, especially since nothing rings the alarm bells of entitlement like an HOA board gathering. As I prepared for the show-stopping showdown, my nerves danced around like cartoon characters on caffeine. I put on my best Let's Contest Karen's worldview outfit. Think pastel and powerful, with a dash of defiance. I swear with each swoosh of the fabric I felt momentarily invincible, like Wonder Woman in a perfectly fitted cardigan. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but imagine Karen sulking amongst her peers, her signature scowl tightening as she fortified her arguments with a heaping pile of self-righteous indignation. I could envision her pacing back and forth, table full of meticulously organized notes about how my ramp was apparently single-handedly draining the neighborhood of elegance. "Oh, Karen, didn't you get the memo? Accessibility is the new black." The fateful evening arrived, and I rolled into the community center like a warrior entering the arena, my heart thumping in sync with the battle cry brewing inside me. As the clock struck 7, I joined the growing audience of neighbors who were restless. A mixture of excitement and apprehension filled the room, swirling with whispers resembling a hive of bees guarding their territory. Skimming the crowd, I caught sight of Mike, casually leaning back against the wall, smartphone in hand, like a laid-back referee enjoying the impending drama. He flashed a reassuring thumbs up, and suddenly, my resolve bubbled over hotter than a pot of Grandma's infamous chili on the stove. I felt the fire ignite within me. This wasn't merely about my ramp. It was a crusade against Karen and the propensity for self-serving beauty standards that come with an HOA sticker. As our HOA president, an overly enthusiastic man named Gary, called the meeting to order, I was struck by how formal this gathering felt. Frankly, I half expected him to don a powdered wig and declare Burlington Place its own flair of royalty, with Karen guarding the throne. Welcome, neighbors. Tonight we discuss community standards, and I believe we should start with Mrs. Jennings' concerns regarding. Gary droned on, but my mind was racing through my notes, each bullet-pointed revelation of the Americans with Disabilities Act reminding me just how absurd this circus truly was. My palms itched with the need to burst forth and unleash a whirlwind of facts, figures, and maybe even a few quips worthy of a comedy special. But patience, Emily, patience. Timing was everything. When Karen got the floor, she radiated indignation like a professional athlete about to showcase her stellar power moves. I just don't understand why we should have to alter our beautiful community to accommodate a ramp. She plastered a horrified expression on her face. This will ruin the lovely look of our houses. Don't even get me started on how it could lower property values. Oh, sweet Karen, if only your perspective could be as flexible as that peplum top you seem to believe actually flatters your silhouette. I could almost see tiny flames dancing within her piercing blue eyes, desperate to scorch my ramp into the ground like a barren blasphemy against suburban aesthetics. As the tension mounted, I could feel the room's atmosphere crackle with anticipation. I took a deep breath, maintaining my inner Wonder Woman as I wheeled forward, clutching my newfound letter of appeal. "Excuse me, Karen." I toe-stepped into my moment of glory, the slight rustle of breath from neighbors punctuating my entrance. While all of your aesthetic worries are noted, I would like to respectfully remind you that the Americans with Disabilities Act ensures that individuals with disabilities have equal rights and access to public spaces. My voice was steady, and I could almost feel the neighbors shift in their seats, perhaps aligning themselves in the invisible battle against entitlement with an echo of support. The room erupted into murmurs, and I couldn't help but give myself a mental high five. Karen's expression morphed into a face I can only describe as equal parts disbelief and disdain, like a melting ice cream cone left in a blazing sun. "But that's just a legalese excuse," she spluttered, clutching the edge of the table as if it might anchor her sinking ideology. The sheer absurdity danced in the air around us. No one sees a single ramp and says, "Well, no thanks. I don't want to live here anymore." I threw back, watching as her face turned a delightful shade of crimson. Oh yes, the tides were turning, and I could feel the momentum of my furious yet just laughter swell around us like a celebration of my victory that hadn't even been declared yet. With every nefarious retort flowing from my lips, I realized this moment had become an unexpected turning point. I wasn't just fighting for my wheelchair ramp. I was carving a larger path, a fight against intolerance cloaked in facades of civic authority. The absurdity of Karen's argument paled in comparison to the powers of enlightenment, drawn from compassion and equality. By the time I finished my speech, I felt as if I'd tapped into the collective hilarity of the universe's skewed sense of justice. What would Karen Jennings do next? Well, I could hardly wait to find out. Would she summon her knitting circle to craft a battalion of no-ramp banners? The battle wasn't just on, it was a comedy unfolding before my very eyes. The audience was mesmerized, caught between the outright comedy of Karen's plight and the seriousness of my cause. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads. Neighbors who just last week would silently share gossip over perfectly manicured lawns were now considering their complicity in the rampage of Karen's smugness. Even Gary seemed to be reading the room, his eyebrows inching upward, as if he could suddenly see the absurdity of drawing boundaries around something so beautifully essential as accessibility. As I wrapped up my spirited speech with the grand finale flourish of my hands, accessibility is not tacky, it's necessary. I leaned back and adjusted my invisible crown, my moment of victory tinged with slightly melodramatic flair. But Karen, bless her furrowed brow and blind ambition, wasn't ready to let anyone, least of all me, dampen her parade of entitlement. Like a superhero who refuses to accept defeat, she launched back into the fray, claiming, "But we're trying to establish community standards here. What about all the children and families that will be visiting? How will they feel knowing there's a ramp? It's just inappropriate." Oh dear, the fear-mongering had landed. Could it be that Karen's imagination was so limited she thought my wheelchair ramp might jump out and start a mosh pit of ramped-up misbehavior? I stifled a laugh. Honestly, how tragic it must be to live one's life in a skin-tight bubble of anxiety about aesthetics rather than acceptance. "Might I remind you," I interjected, "that children and families include people in wheelchairs? Wouldn't it be just dandy if kids could learn compassion instead of crumbling into fear at the mere mention of a wheelchair ramp?" I could sense the temperature rising. Was it warmth from the support of neighboring warriors, or was it just Karen's palpable rage heating the air? The smirk on Mike's face was contagious. The enthusiasm in the room was electrifying, and those once disinterested glances of my neighbors were now piercing together. I reveled in the chaos I was creating. A delightful dance of bravado and absurdity was unfolding, and I never intended to miss a beat. Just then, a hand shot up from the crowd. It belonged to Brenda, a sweet lady who lived 2 doors down and was known for her floral teacups and unyielding commitment to Friday game nights. "Excuse me, Karen, I have to ask," Brenda proclaimed, her voice steady yet dripping with sweetness. "What exactly is inappropriate about making our community accessible to everyone? Wouldn't it be better to focus on inclusion rather than exclusion?" You could practically feel the collective gasp ripple through the audience. Brenda's sudden assertion was enough to send Karen's impeccable posture quaking, leaving her to paw at the lectern like a lifeguard in despair. My heart did a small kick of joy. The revolution had begun right here in our little HOA meeting, and oh, the sweet flavor of rebellion was almost palpable. Karen's hands flailed a bit, trying to grasp on to whatever flimsy foundation had slipped beneath her representative's arguments. "I am just taking care of the property values. You all love your little green yards and tasteful decor." But I found myself chuckling at this ridiculous notion. And how is adding a ramp diminishing that, may I ask? Would you rather see an actual legitimate ramp for, oh, I don't know, a human being? Or should we open bids for a gnarled bush sculpture of you, Karen? Gasps cascaded from the room, and I was riding the wave of chaos like a sailor in stormy seas. The once rose-tinted view of community was morphing into something chaotic and beautiful, something that warriors for accessibility fought for fiercely. With the room thick with tension and budding laughter, I felt like a symphony conductor leading the melody of justice. The applause started as a trickle, but soon swelled into a raucous celebration for every person embracing their uniqueness. I beamed with how the tide had turned. Even Karen's furrowed brow was beginning to look like she was moving into territory best known for its shock and disappointment. Please, can you all just think about the future? What good will come from this? She wailed with a wobbly voice. And there it was, a desperation that had transformed the mighty Karen Jennings into a cornered, shaky figure. Think about the future? I countered with a leaning confidence. I will gladly think about a future where my girls, or anyone else for that matter, can roll freely and without barriers. I think about how every child should see that difference doesn't minimize beauty, it enhances it. This ramp isn't a blight. It's a beacon for community, inclusion, and strength. The claps crescendoed, shaking the very core of our HOA like a heartbeat of change. Perhaps, I thought, as I stared defiantly at Karen's bewildered face, maybe the real question wasn't whether I'd get a ramp. It was about whether entire childhoods would evolve on the right side of history, a question that lingered long beyond the confines of an HOA meeting. As I settled back in my wheelchair, the exhilarating quiz of unity seemed to wrap itself around me like a warm blanket. The absurd irony was perfect. From one woman's judgmental stance to a proactive call for change, all sparked by a ramp. The future seemed brighter, a canvas painted not just with accessibility but with the glowing embers of passionate resolve. I could hardly wait to see how the board would respond. Would they rally behind the audacity of equality or retreat into their echo chambers of entitlement? Either way, I knew one thing. The fight was far from over, and I was truly just getting started on this journey to battle absurdity with humor, pride, and maybe one less bigoted HOA meeting in our lives. As I sat there, cradled within my modest monument of courage, I could feel the adrenaline flowing through my veins like a new batch of coffee making its grand debut in the morning. The electric buzz in the room was impossible to ignore. A collective force of neighborly solidarity hung heavy in the air. I might as well have been sitting atop a magnificent stage, orchestrating a performance that has all the chaos of a circus and the seriousness of a revolution. Faces around me were brightened by the glow of awakening, no longer content to be mere spectators in Karen's grand delusion of a perfect neighborhood. Feelings of camaraderie ignited, uniting us against the ridiculousness of one woman's vanity. Could it be? Had I somehow become the reluctant Pied Piper of accessibility? The thought was comical, yet exhilarating. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Mike giving me a thumbs up, his signature grin like sunlight breaking through a cloud. The moment was intoxicating. The stakes had never felt higher, and the laughter reverberating around the room only amplified my bold resolve. "Let's make this clear, Karen," I called out, leaning into my newfound role. "A neighborhood's worth should never be dictated by superficial standards or the shiny facade of someone else's idea of aesthetics. If we're aiming for community values, inclusivity needs to hold top-notch priority." The clapping that followed felt like the sound of freedom-breaking chains, and I could feel the cultivation of solidarity working its magic. Just then, in a twist that must have been scripted by a comedy writer after an especially eventful night, a new yet familiar face made their way to the front. It was Gary, the man sporting an impressive array of gopher holes in his front yard, who out of nowhere decided to join the fray. "I mean, what's next? Banning flower gardens because they don't fit into Karen's perfect vision?" he quipped, his booming voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "What if we embrace diversity among ramps and garden gnomes? We could all learn a thing or two about beauty in different shapes." His fervor ignited a round of laughter, and I cheered. My very own absurdity parade had begun. Suddenly, the gravity of our collective fight felt light and buoyant, as if we were lilting clouds leaving behind the heaviness of piecemeal bureaucracy. Karen's expression now resembled a Pinterest fail, caught somewhere between disbelief and overwhelmed rage, her tightly wound composure beginning to unravel like an ill-fitted cardigan. The irony was delicious. Here we were, an unassuming cohort causing her picture-perfect world to shudder. "This isn't about you," she shrieked, voice rising in pitch, accentuating her dissonance amongst the musical laughter. "It's about maintaining standards." A knowledgeable snort escaped me at that moment. Karen seemed unaware that hastily masking a selfish agenda with faux concern only stuck her deeper in quicksand. "Forgive me," I shot back with sarcasm dripping from my tongue. "But when exactly did your standards become synonymous with discrimination? Surely you don't believe shouting louder will erase the truth." Another supportive voice emerged from the crowd, this one belonging to Brenda, who had flourished into an unlikely hero. "Karen, But we all know just how standardized and boring things can become courtesy of your visions. If we must endure your certainly lovely aesthetic of, well, whatever it is you envision, how about we throw in a slant of creativity with ramps that dazzle? The way she emphasized dazzle had the audience stifling giggles. I grinned slyly at Brenda, equal parts amused and inspired, reveling in this newfound movement fueled by rebellion. The momentum was intoxicating. I wondered, could this simply be the beginning? A call to arms to paint our collective home, not just in colors that someone scribbled onto a boardroom table, but vivid tones that spoke to our diverse realities. The tide was turning toward glorious chaos, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a sense of buoyancy. "Karen," I said, my voice unwavering, "why wouldn't we want ramps adorned with flowers or vibrant murals? What's wrong with creating a community that's as lively as its members? A ramp might be our modern-day canvas, a patch of beauty in a world starving for empathy." The room, still buzzing, appeared at a tipping point. Neighbors shifted in their seats as though they had been struck by a moment of clarity, no longer shackled by Karen's restrictive ideals. Suddenly, I wasn't just Emily Carter, the woman with a delightful ramp. I had transformed into the embodiment of defiance, the voice of my neighbors, capturing a spirit of advocacy the HOA had sure tried to cage. As the meeting marched on, each savage clap of support made it loud and clear this wasn't just about me. This was about every unsung voice yearning to break free from bureaucratic chains. I felt empowered, and yet, deep down, I delighted in the irony. For every shred of entitlement Karen clung to, we were gaining repositories of hope, trust, and laughter. Maybe this is what justice looks like, I mused, aglow with a sense of relief and bubbling purpose. Surely, I would emerge victorious, buttressed by an army of awkward yet enthusiastic advocates. So, as I prepared to launch into my next poignant point, I couldn't shake the question, would Karen finally grasp that aesthetics infused with accessibility only enhanced our community's beauty? The room pulsed with energy, the stakes had never felt higher, the enjoyment intensified with every laugh, every jab directed at the surprisingly fragile facade of neighborhood aesthetic Queen Karen. As I scanned the sea of familiar faces, the solidarity was palpable. I locked eyes with Mike, who gave me another enthusiastic thumbs up from the audience, the warmth of his unwavering support infusing me with courage. "Well, folks, it seems we have an emerging trend, what I like to call the Karen paradox," I exclaimed, waving my hands dramatically. "Case in point, can't see the diversity when blinded by a rigid color palette, am I right?" The crowd roared in delight. My righteous indignation had morphed into a comedy show, and I was the headliner. With each new laugh, I reveled in the absurdity of it all. Karen, visibly wilting before our very eyes, looked like a balloon slowly deflating, a comical mix of disbelief and barely restrained fury. Believers in collective justice, the very fabric of what society should strive for, had gathered to lift the veil from Karen's entitlement-laden worldview. "Dear neighbors," I continued, relishing the atmosphere, "what if we envision our ramps as joyful structures, like vibrant slides at a playground that spark happiness instead of shame?" I leaned forward, peering over at Karen, who seemed torn between feigning indignance and standing her ground. "Isn't it time to acknowledge the beauty in people's uniqueness, instead of sanitizing it behind a screen of bland conformity?" Oh, it was delightful. Karen's face turned redder than a hotel room carpet as Brenda's rallying cry began to ripple through the room. "Yes, let the ramp designs become invitations for creativity. Let's ditch the boring beige for something with, dare I say, pizzazz," Brenda said, her infectious enthusiasm almost electric. The audience erupted into fits of laughter, a chorus of newfound freedom. The dialogue was a metaphorical kaleidoscope, each voice adding vibrant tones to the previously drab conversations of HOA meetings. I could clearly see what Karen couldn't possibly fathom. Barriers weren't just physical, they also resided in minds that refused to budge. Gripped by a mix of giddy adrenaline and righteous indignation, I seized the moment to address the most absurd spectacle hiding in plain sight. "Newsflash, Karen. The ADA isn't just a catchy acronym, it's a legal guideline reflecting the dignity of individuals." The audience cheered, some shaking their fists in faux outrage. "And news to me, did you know that the ramp industry is working hard to create artistic designs to embrace not just accessibility but celebration? Because why not?" My own sarcasm levitated humorously over Karen's outraged pride. The tide was surely turning, and it felt like sweet revenge against the iron-fisted reign of the HOA. I savored the moment as hilarity wove itself through a serious cause, What a twisted irony indeed. Karen, now a shade reminiscent of overripe fruit, still attempted to make her case. But we need to consider our home values, she huffed, her commanding presence dwindling as words paraded past her lips in desperation. The integrity of our neighborhood is at stake. Yet this time, the audience was not willing to let those words slide. Distant laughter peppered her comments, like the faint sounds of a circus echoing outside a library. Integrity, my dear Karen, I shot back, isn't found in mere appearance, but in behavior. Are you even tuned in to what home truly means? Cheers of approval punctuated my commentary, the irony of her vanity resonating loudly in the faces that seemed to symbolize the very change we sought. The irony was truly a masterstroke of the universe. Couldn't she see that by attempting to smother others' voices, she suffocated her own credibility? The quicker she realized that her delusions of grandeur were not just simple rules but a barricade against the beautiful mosaic we could become, the closer I'd be to winning. Can you imagine if we all celebrated each other's individuality instead of stifling it beneath your suffocating standards? Wouldn't that make our community a place where everyone belongs? The crowd stirred, excitement blooming into whispers of agreement. If only she knew how restrictive her demands truly were, as if I'd given birth to the world's most joyfully unusable ramp. As the meeting continued, I felt like a conductor leading a symphony orchestra, every laugh and cheer feeding into my determination. Yet, even within the chaos, I noticed a glimmer of realization in the eyes of some homeowners, the early glimmers of empathy taking root. What a marvel it would be to break free from such superficial needs. Karen, isn't it time we transition from rigid rules to fostering authenticity? Perhaps, instead of punishing creativity, we ought to channel our energy into uniting as a community. The murmurs transformed into a roar of approval, reminding me that we could be a force to be reckoned with, breaking down those absurdly self-imposed borders. With every point I made, the atmosphere felt charged with courageous defiance. I could practically taste the exhilarating flavor of victory. It was empowering. It struck me how, at the end of this meeting, I might not just be Emily Carter, a single mother with a brightly colored ramp. I could be an agent of change, surrounded by friends and neighbors willing to stand for justice. And maybe, just maybe, Karen would be forced to confront the absurdity of her stringent aesthetic judgments. Finally, with one last flourish, I declared loud and clear. So can we collectively agree that instead of monitoring what people construct, how about we collectively construct a neighborhood defined by acceptance and creativity? Wouldn't that be a neighborhood worth fighting for? As the laughter began to die down, a thrilling hush settled over the room, like a curtain poised to draw back on a show of extravagant spectacle. Karen, the beleaguered monarch of suburban dread, attempted one last, desperate rallying cry. But think of our property values, she charged, her voice teetering between indignation and panic. Do you really want to live next to someone who sets a blaring neon example of inconsistency? The irony didn't escape anyone, and I smirked internally. Property values? Surely she'd heard that you can't put a price on happiness, but who could blame her for being out of touch? I could almost hear her neighborhood dreams deflating like a poorly inflated balloon, a sound so comical. I wanted to whip out a recording device just to capture this golden moment in absurdity. In the throes of this showdown, Mike leaned toward me and whispered with the utmost sincerity, "You know, Emily, property values might just be coded language for let's keep everything bland and boring to fuel Karen's vision of paradise." I chuckled, nudging him playfully as I let this new thought roll around in my mind. Each jab I took at her carefully constructed fortress of conformity felt like sending out vibrations of defiance through the very foundation she sought to secure. "Oh, perfect, Karen," I announced dramatically with hand gestures grander than a Broadway production. "Wouldn't you rather live on a street where creativity flows like a luscious river instead of a stagnant pond? How else would we actually feel alive?" My words rolled off my tongue like honey-coated daggers. Emboldened, I looked around, absorbing the nods of approval swinging back to my side faster than ping-pong balls at a championship match. Bolstered by the audience's growing connection, I harnessed the laughter that bubbled up like the fizz of an unshaken soda can about to burst. I pivoted back to the matter at hand, Karen's relentless antagonism. If a ramp is a catalyst for ridicule, how do we redefine our definitions of home? What if instead of sneering, we celebrated those unique touches that make our community stand out? The audience rippled with laughter, momentarily distracting me from my task of unraveling her self-appointed authority. I mean, come on. If my ramp inspires me to create a vibrant garden instead of hiding behind gray bricks, Who's really being served by your eternal aesthetic judgment? The applause and cheers spiraled upward, creating a deluge of shared thoughts and collective intention, a cacophony against stifling norms and stereotypes. Amid this surge of camaraderie, I caught Karen's glare, sharpening like a sword unsheathed. Yet, instead of intimidation, she brought forth a curious blend of vulnerability and desperation. Well, fine then. What if I want to build my own ramp next to yours simply to show that I can be inclusive too? She exclaimed. And at that moment, the room went dead silent. A pin would have been loud. I stifled a laugh. Was she seriously considering rolling on the inclusive train? Could it be that a little of my fiery spirit had begun to seep into her crusty facade? But before I could formulate a response, Mike leaned in again and whispered, "The chances of Karen building a ramp are about as high as her stepping foot in a thrift shop. Just never gonna happen." I bit my lip to contain my giggles, though the sidebar served as a potent reminder of how fragile the line was between reality and the laughter spewing forth in this hallway of destiny. Finally, feeling my footing solidify, I intentionally turned my back on her to face my growing supporters. "Ladies and gentlemen of the HOA, let's reconsider if aesthetic change might just be the spark we were missing," I proclaimed with a raised fist, puncturing the air. "Let's make a collective agreement. Instead of walls separating us, let's embrace the ramps, the colors, the quirks that infuse our neighborhood with life." The atmosphere shifted again, and Karen's stunned silence felt almost like the calm before a comedic storm. Even I sensed she couldn't avoid this tidal wave. The room erupted into boisterous applause, and I momentarily felt like I was in the presence of true comrades, marching toward the dawn of a far more colorful community than Karen's rigid fantasies could ever offer. As the drumming of applause wrapped around me like a warm blanket, I spotted a glimmer of something akin to realization flickering in Karen's bewildered blue eyes. What next? I wondered amidst the excitement. Would she embrace change or dig deep into denial and pride, tunneling herself further into a pit of outdated paradigm? The audience's enthusiasm felt infectious. Their support catalyzed hopes of greater dialogue in our community. A sudden idea sparked in my mind like fireworks on New Year's Eve. Why not invite the entire neighborhood to an accessibility and creativity fair? Let's gather our enthusiasms, our stories, and even our artistic endeavors into an event celebrating everything we can build together, I declared with a twinkle in my eye, and the arena of laughter morphed into waves of genuine excitement layered with anticipation for what's to come. As the meeting concluded and laughter subsided into shared chuckles, the brilliance of our neighborhood seemed to ignite like an ember waiting to blaze into a bonfire of unity. I gazed around for signs of solidifying camaraderie, finally feeling a sense of victory wash over me. Each face, illuminated by diploma-style zeal, reflected an understanding of social justice sharper than any rejoinder I could hurl. Surely even Karen had to admit that her desire for conformity paled in comparison to the colorful diversity bubbling to life in our neighborhood now. But would she acknowledge it? The next chapter of our community story had only just begun. Wouldn't it be ironic if Karen, the architect of supposed order, became its greatest advocate for change? The very next day, just when I thought the hilarity of our HOA debacle had peaked, I received a letter that would put even the most dramatic soap operas to shame. It arrived like a royal decree, embossed and signed with the authority of the Disability Board. As I tore open the envelope, the words practically burst forth, singing their glorious victory song. "Congratulations," it cheered. "Your wheelchair ramp is not just a necessary personal adaptation but a shining beacon of community inclusivity. If I hadn't been sitting in my wheelchair, I might have done a little victory dance right there." My mind raced with the comically surreal image of Karen, clutching her pristine coffee mug, her perfectly coiffed hair frizzing as she stumbled back at the news, her deluded dominion of uniformity shattered like a sugar glass ornament on a kitchen floor. Imagine, for a second, poor Karen. Her face could have been sliced into a cartoonish expression of utter horror, all because of a simple wooden ramp. Did she genuinely believe that a slope of boards could threaten the very foundation of her sharply manicured villa? I could laugh all day imagining her pacing her immaculate lawn, her mind twisting in knots while she resolved to summon some secret council of snobby neighbors to mitigate the horror of an actual human need intruding upon her aesthetic kingdom. My excitement bubbled within me, as if I had just chugged a 2-liter soda and was now bursting with laughter, ready to celebrate this absurdity at the next neighborhood gathering. Who knew that in the unlikeliest of circumstances, an old dusty HOA regulation could yield a win for sanity, like a fairy tale twist in the tale of suburban absurdity? That evening, I concocted plans not just for a whimsical accessibility and creativity fair, but for a full-blown celebration of community triumph. I envisioned paper lanterns dangling from trees, vibrant artwork strewn alongside lawns, and the cheers of children playing together, all infused with the aroma of homemade goodies wafting through the air. I enlisted Mike as my co-conspirator, his scruffy beard bobbing with delight, as I laid the event out before him like an artist revealing their magnum opus. "Think of it!" I exclaimed, my eyes practically glistening. "A place where creativity, accessibility, and community can dance like the sun over the horizon." He chuckled, nudging my shoulder playfully. "Well, it sounds like you're ready to roll, quite literally, into a new era of HOA democracy." As our wild plans snaked their way into action, I witnessed a transformation around me. My neighbors, who once eyed my ramp with a mixture of pity and shame, started to rally around the notion of embracing individuality and creativity. The whispers I had overheard about lesser property values morphed into discussions brimming with excitement. Everyone wanted to contribute something unique to the fair. Suddenly, the quiet conversations that had lingered in the background shifted into a captivating chorus of laughter, murmurs of art, and clattering tools as neighbors enthusiastically embraced their inner creators. My heart swelled with a sense of unity, as though we were building not just a fair but a reimagined community. Of course, none of this was without a hefty dose of the hilarious absurd. Picture Karen bursting forth from her house one Saturday with a flurry of indignation, brandishing a clipboard like it was Excalibur. "Excuse me," she shouted through the churn of laughter and enthusiasm, clearly in panic mode as her pristine plans for the aesthetic supremacy were upturned. "You can't simply turn our quaint neighborhood into a carnival." "Oh, Karen, if only you could see the joy radiating from your neighbors." I gestured dramatically to the colorful chaos that had taken shape. Children finger-painting murals, a neighbor constructing an elaborate wooden sculpture, and a group setting up a petting zoo featuring whatever neighborhood pets would cooperate, probably not my cat, Empress Whiskers, who hated anything outside. "Carnival?" I shot back, barely able to stifle my laughter. "This is an accessibility zone, where joy, acceptance, and creativity illuminate our community. Don't you see? You could join us, Karen. Maybe bring that monocle you got from a yard sale and tell people how fine your taste in spatial aesthetics really is." Laughter erupted, shaking the air with its effervescence. Karens of all kinds learn quickly that fighting joy is like tussling with a tornado. Mike added, "I doubt your clipboard holds any power here, Karen. It's already been outvoted by public opinion." I couldn't help but marvel at how the audacity of my ramp had transformed into a catalyst for wild, vibrant unity as the absurd battle of shy reforms rolled from Karen's ludicrous ideals into a hearty celebration of individuality. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the day of the fair and twilight illuminated the neighborhood with a hue of lavender brilliance, our community gathered around a makeshift stage. I stood before them, the air ripe with excitement, laughter echoing all around as we prepared to celebrate our differences and challenges. "Today is not just about ramps and creativity," I proclaimed, my voice rising above the playful chaos. "It's a testament to our strength, our laughter, and the sheer ridiculousness of combating entitlement with joy. One ramp at a time, applause engulfed me like a warm blanket, and I could feel the unity in every clap. Even Karen seemed to soften, her scowl evaporating underneath the warmth of community spirit. Could it be true? Could even she have a change of heart? With laughter hanging in the air, I felt a rush of disbelief and elation. It was more than a fair. It was that situation where unassuming heroes emerged, molding not just a brighter neighborhood but redefining our stories. I glanced sideways at Mike, who had turned into my trusty sidekick, his eyes twinkling in wonder. "See?" he said, nudging me playfully. "When you turn up the heat with creativity, even the old guard can start dancing with the flames." And just like that, our neighborhood had become a picturesque canvas, quite the masterpiece, ready to be displayed with roaring pride. And I wondered, what other wonderful absurdities awaited us next?